everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with Pastor Brian and Kyell Gold, and we're going to be discussing homosexuality. And I just want to say up front that we're not going to be discussing this in a biological sense. I looked up the numbers. Biologists have seen homosexual behaviors in over 450 different species between mammals and birds and even reptiles. So it's been around for a long time. Is it in our species? Yes. Is it natural? Yes. Moving on. But we want to talk about more of the social aspect of it, and I will throw it open to Kyell, who wants to have some opening remarks on this topic.
Anytime you talk about homosexuality in the animal kingdom, I really just want to bring up the Philadelphia Zoo, which had two male lions who would famously have sex just out in their enclosure, which I always think is a great story.
I got to go to Philly. I didn't know that. Yeah.
This was in a book like 30 years ago, so they're probably gone by now. But yeah, it's really been encouraging to me how much the public perception of homosexuality and really any alternate sexualities has changed in the past. The 4-ish decades that I've been alive and aware of those kinds of things. And the fact that people are feeling comfortable enough to find different shades of sexuality to claim, to more accurately describe them and forge their identity is also, to me, a really good sign for the future.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah, I think absolutely what you both have said. God, that's such good stuff. I mean, I think when we brought up this topic that we were going to talk about it, right away my thought was that in general, in Western culture, as far as I know, like it just same gender attraction, gender bending, and all that just wasn't really noted or worried about until kind of a Judeo-Christian ethic like came and imposed itself. And so I do think it's a good thing to just kind of, as Nancy Wilson writes in our tribe here that I'll probably reference again, we've always been, right? I know they didn't have to call themselves homosexuals because they didn't have to define it or limit it the way we're forced to, because now we have to counter kind of the inquisition of it. But I know men in every place and every time have loved each other the way I love men, have been, physically attracted to each other the way I'm physically attracted to men. And that goes for all the different subtle stripes of queerness that we're defining again now. They just didn't have to be defined in cultures that didn't vilify them needlessly, right? And so for me as a pastor, it's hard for me all the time to say I'm a Christian, not that kind of a Christian, not that kind of a pastor. But one of the reasons I still stick to it is to kind of try and undo some of that toxic patriarchy, toxic policing of other people's bodies, toxic policing of other people's sexualities, that sex negativity. I try and undo that because really it came with Christianity to the Western culture.
Okay.
And I think if I can jump in real quick, I think that's great, because one of the things that we learned growing up and growing into our gay identities was being open about things is the way to help people sympathize with you. And so you're kind of doing that from the opposite side, where you're coming to the gay community and saying, I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, and helping those people see that the religion isn't a monolithic enemy, that there are sympathetic people in it, and that it offers comfort to people as well. And so I think that's very cool.
Famously said by our hero, Harvey Milk, come out wherever you are, right? To come out to your neighbors, come out to your coworkers, come out to your loved ones, come out to your families. And again, we understand why those who don't, right? We're not shaming anyone for not coming out, but that is a decision I made a long time ago. And I warned my poor family be prepared to see me on TV in a clergy collar and a rainbow feather boa, right? Like, I mean, that's just what I do.
Brian, where's the boa?
Maybe putting some use to my iconoclastic nature, may I know.
Yeah. So, so what I want to mention that I mean, how we view, I guess, homosexual behavior has changed over time. I want to talk about this book in case anybody would like to leave something in the comments about how we all are promoting abomination or something that you might want to check out some books. This is a good book. This is by a guy who kind of came around after he started studying the 7 of the clobber text, the whole 7 verses in the Bible that may or may not condemn homosexuality, and looking at them in the original languages, and then looking at them in terms of what verses come before, what verses come after, so you have the whole discussion of what's being, talked about there. Is it really gay sex or not? And a lot of times he comes down the side of what probably really isn't, or if it is, it's only a certain kind of gay sex, and then if women are having sex or men are having non-penetrative sex, nobody cared. So that's a different different attitude than a lot of people might have. So I would encourage you to check out that book or other books like it if you want to learn more on that topic.
And I don't want to frame everything by the Bible, but since I kind of did frame it that way of being a major influence in the vilification of queerness, what we now call queerness, I would say that that's a good start for those people who are worried, does the Bible condemn homosexuality? But of course, I'm just going to say it doesn't matter what you interpret the Bible. If you interpret the Bible in a way that says God does not love everyone and want them to thrive in whom they love and how they identify gender, it doesn't matter what the Bible, right? Like, there is no legitimate translation of the Bible or interpretation of God that condemns human love and human attraction and natural sexuality and the way people are involved in queerness. So if you're willing to take that leap, I say, if you're worried about what the Bible says, I would say don't spend a lot of time trying to argue with people what the Bible says, right? If you need that, I think that's helpful. But I say, God's not God if God doesn't love you, right? And then I'll take it a step further when I'm talking about queering the Bible, because one of the things, it's funny, I have a book, my mentor, Ted Jennings, who just passed away this year, rest in power, Ted, Jacob's Wound, and probably his most important, I think I've loaned out, the Man Jesus Loved. And Ted looks at the text and says, usually what the text says is more queer, and people do backflips to explain why it's not queer, right? Or at least in many, many places of the Bible. And so people who claim to read the Bible literally are actually doing backflips to impose their heteronormative patriarchal vision onto it. And so there's nothing wrong with queering it. There's nothing wrong with reading the Bible, taking your own context and seeing yourself in there, and always interpreting every single thing. Either it is interpreting God's love for you and your goodness, or else it's not useful, it's not accurate. So maybe to put to bed the whole Christian part of that, I would say there is a continuum of where you're comfortable on that, but don't be uncomfortable saying, I own this. Absolutely, David and Jonathan were gay. Absolutely, Ruth and Naomi were lesbians. But you could go even further than that. Nancy Wilson and Our Tribe, her original work. This is a little essentialist because it's written in the 80s. But, she says eunuchs, there are all types of eunuchs. It even says that in Matthew, I think, 19. There are all different kinds of eunuchs. They're not just castrati, right? They weren't, but there were key people who did not have a traditional marriage and children between men and women and all that stuff. And so they were trusted, and they had all these gifts, and that's why they were used. And so queerness was a gift that was celebrated even once Christian hegemony was imposed on our culture. Still, why are monks and nuns celibate, supposedly, right? Like, they don't have kids that they can dedicate themselves to being eunuchs. They're eunuchs. So even under the veil of Christianity, there is liberation. You just don't have to buy all that crap.
Okay, so I got some feedback there? All right. So what we do see in our culture now seems to be a lot of people who are getting more accepting. I think in my students, I've seen a big change in the past 13 or 14 years between kind of like, well, they never really said anything out loud in class. I think even then, you know, students were smart enough to know they couldn't come out in class and say, you know, gay's an abomination or something. But you kind of tell by some of their papers or something, they really wanted to say it, you know. And I don't.
That one left when I asked about pronouns that time. You remember?
Oh,
You
I
remember?
don't see that so much anymore. So, you know, I think, you know, the younger generations seem to be, if, you know, just be more like, whatever, everybody is how they are. You know, students in class now seem much more comfortable to say, I'm bisexual. I'm like, okay, I don't know that I asked you that, but sure. Or just to come up and say, hey, my pronouns are, you know, whatever. So, you know, we seem to be moving forward in some of those kind of things where people are feeling more comfortable in their skin, maybe, you know, when they're 17 or 18. And it's obviously taken us a long time to get here. So, like, what are some of the changes that maybe you've noticed in your life, Kyell?
So for sure, it's much easier to be out. It's when I started working, or I should say, when I started working out of college, when I started kind of forming my identity, I wouldn't talk to casual acquaintances about it. I just had a close circle of friends. When I came out to California, started a new job, I would play the pronoun game with my coworkers when talking about my boyfriend at the time. And my manager kind of called me on it and said it like it wasn't a big deal. And so I started to feel more comfortable. And then like the next job that I took, I would just, you know, mention to everybody, oh, I'm, you know, married, I have a husband, and everyone was cool with it. Of course, you know, I live in urban California, so I'm in a city in one of the more progressive states, so your mileage may vary. But I think the neat thing for me has been moving from, if I think more about my time in the furry fandom community, because that was always a place where you could be out and people would just accept it. A furry convention was the first place I held hands with my boyfriend in public. That was really liberating. And when I first joined, which was 20 to 30 years ago now, there was very much like you were gay or you were straight. And then there were kind of like, maybe some people are bisexual, but we don't really know any of those people. But I definitely met trans people in the community early on. And now the fact that people can come out and say, well, I'm pansexual, I'm demisexual, I'm ace, I'm aromantic, but I'm homosexual, but aromantic. The fact that we not only have all of these words to describe the shades of queerness, but the general attitude now is, tell me what you are, and if I don't know the word, I'll ask you to explain it. The fact that we're accepting that there are all of these gradations and differences is a thing that I find really joyful, to be honest. And I feel a little like I'm maybe, do I have any of those labels? I don't know. I'm just gay and poly. So, and everyone knows what that is. But I think it's that people are able to more accurately affirm their own identity in public. And the fact that we're moving towards greater acceptance of that, just in my own anecdotal experience.
I think we're certainly seeing at least little steps toward more representation in movies and television shows. and commercials, with maybe some shows not even really even calling attention to it, right? Having a couple of gay characters and no one really even mentions it, as if like, oh, they're the first gay couple on ABC or whatever. It's like, now it's like, okay,
Hmm.
oh, there's some characters. Moving on. So hopefully be more representation and of just not just, as you said, straight and gay, but of the entire spectrum.
I think it's interesting that you said I'm just gay and poly, because poly is one that really gets beat up on by a lot of people. And of course, I'm also I'm prone to poly. I'm single now, so I'm just promiscuous. But they just which also gets beat up, especially a pastor who is sexually active and sex positive and promiscuous. But there are all those things, right, that happen to promiscuous polyamory and which are not the same things, by the way. I'm not trying to equate the two.
Right,
but AIDS happened, right? And there was all this shaming, for not settling down with one person and doing safer sex and all those things. The movement towards gay marriage, it goes all the way back to when they used to tell people showing up for gay pride parades to dress up acceptably, right? Like you had to look acceptable, and if you are being promiscuous, or if you're having an open relationship or a relationship that's expansive, that you're somehow hurting the cause for those who want to have a heteronormative marriage, right, or things like that. So I think maybe now that same-gender marriage is legal, it is opening up the space again for those of us who have no desire to engage in a heteronormative defined relationship. So that is an interesting progress, I think, really, but I still get tons of pushback. And when I tell guys that I might be interested in like a poly constellation or kaleidoscope or something, and they immediately just go ape shit on me sometimes. And so that itself is something that people still want to police. Sexuality. People want to police other people's respectability and sexuality, and they feel it reflects on them, which I find interesting as well.
It's funny you mention poly getting beat up on, because just like a year or two ago, I'm trying to think of what show it was, but we were all excited because we were like, oh, there's a poly relationship in this show, and like it's positively portrayed. And then in the last couple years, BoJack Horseman had it was an 8-person poly relationship, but they were all very stable and positive. And the Hulu series Future Man, which is great, also has a poly relationship in it. Avenue 5, which was the big budget HBO show from the creator of Veep, has a poly relationship in it. And so we're just starting to see it open up more. And I know I don't want to sidetrack the discussion of homosexuality, but I think poly is interesting because it's something that straight people can also get into, where people are like, oh, like you just have an extra person in the relationship. That's fine. Once they open their minds to that extent, it's not like, oh, I have to think about people doing things that I don't like. It's just adding a person or two, or it's all about the relationship. It's not about the physicality of it.
I think there's very real baggage that we have from patriarchal exploitation of women, right, and policing of women's bodies and possession of women's bodies. And so I do think for me it's easier, as a gay man, right, like to say that I have a constellation of guys, where all of a sudden if I said, I have a constellation of women, that sounds different, right, when you hear that. And that's just the context of what we're coming from. And ideally, like I have friends that are in a constellation of straight and same gender loving men and women, right? Like, and so they're doing the work really, because those men have to listen to those women, and those women have to communicate when the men are just defaulting to patriarchy. Yeah.
And that's one thing I try to get across to my students, that when we're talking about things like that I'm not calling them bad, if they don't realize what they're saying or doing. That our culture, we grow up in a culture where some of these things weren't talked about or weren't acceptable. Once you become aware of it, then you need to decide how you're going to react to it. But the fact that you didn't notice maybe that there was toxic masculinity and that you were using words that you shouldn't use or whatever. Okay, fine. But now you know better. Think about it. Try to take a step back. Look at your culture. How are women being treated or talked about? How do you talk about women? How do you talk about gay men if you're not one? So people try to just get them to be a little more to think about it without getting defensive, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the hegemonic gaze, right? Like the idea that I decide something about someone else and that my decision is the the ultimate understanding of it, right? Where I completely have no standing, right? It's not even my experience. So why would I feel like I have an opinion on it, much less that I'm the right one? But yet that is empire, and that is what I think our culture is, right? It's very colonial that way.
Well, especially if you're a white male, that's been your role, is to be defined what everybody else gets to be, right? And what their roles in society get to be, and do they even get to, inherit wealth or work a job or, have voting rights or whatever else. It was, white guys deciding all that for everyone else. So, so especially the white guys in class is like, okay, we're not saying they're all evil or something. We just need to talk about the institutional ways that white males have set up and that we might want to dismantle. Including,
I think your point. I think your point about not taking it personally is really important, because I know people who have done that when they hear people say, "Oh, white cis men are all like this," and then they go, "But I'm not like this. Now I'm mad at you. How dare you say that thing?" And
not all white men, right?
Right. And you have to realize the point is they're talking about a specific behavior that this group does, and if you don't do that behavior, then why are you mad? Like, you should use that as an opportunity to examine, how can I be better? How can I disprove this example? As opposed to the people who say, well, if you're going to keep calling me a fascist, then I guess I'll just go join the Nazi party. See what you made me do.
Because that's the other part of that toxic white masculinity, is we then center ourselves, right? So if you said something, I have to now make it about me, and if I don't think it's right, then I have to fight you, and I have to win, and I have to be right, because I'm always right, because I'm the white male.
And I know I've read a couple stories on maybe like various film sets where the white hero, white male hero, will be chatting with like co-stars, like a female co-star or whatever, discover that they've been paid some pittance to be in this movie. And, then they march right up to the producer's office and it's like, you can't pay me X number $1 million, this other person like $100,000 to be in this movie, you better make it right. And if they're big enough, in Hollywood, then things change and things happen. So you can always try to help change it, even if you're a white guy. Right? So, and I think a lot of people are trying to change things. It's just not everybody, but we drag them along kicking and screaming.
But I think also one of the things I've learned is that if it's a clear case like that, where you have the power to say, pay her the same or I'll walk, then that's great. But there's also a tendency to want to be a savior. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that can work and sometimes it can't. And the thing that you have to do is listen to the person and find out, and like ask them, in what way can I be an ally? In what way can I be the best ally for you? What would be the best? And sometimes all they want is for you to listen and just say, like, let me say my piece, amplify it, point other people back at me and help other people listen and hear what I have to say.
Yeah.
I remember reading on like Obama's cabinet that this happened, where he had a diverse cabinet, and yet the women discovered that the men would talk over them, and that if they had an idea, then it would be dismissed. But 2 minutes later, a guy comes up with the same idea, and suddenly it's a great idea. So they discussed this, and they're like, okay, so they didn't really like think that the guys on the cabinet were like, bad men. They're just like, okay, we need to point this out to them. So they got together, they said, look, this is what's happening during our meetings. We just want you to be aware. We're aware of it, and you should be aware of it too. And the guys were like, oh, and because they didn't know, right? This is how you grow up in our society. And so they started checking themselves, and if they started falling back in those old habits, someone would be like, okay, Jane just said that 2 minutes ago, and kind of like, oh, so they were willing to take that step back instead of getting defensive and to say, I can do better.
That's why they talk about being an anti-racist, and we need to be, anti-patriarchal as well. I mean, I still do all these, right? I've been educated and tried to be woke to it, which some people would say is bad, but I say once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. But I still screw it up, right? And that's why we have to avoid that fragility, right? That non-defensiveness, so that people can call us in or call us out sometimes, and still and not center ourselves. It's not about me, right? And it's not, my whole world's not going to end because I wasn't perfect. And so those are all, and even like saying I'm sorry, a lot of my friends will say, well, now you're putting the baggage on me, but just say, okay, I'm going to fix it. Thank you. Instead of I'm sorry, say thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for, again, for putting in your emotional work to educate me on something that I already should know and need to be better at. Right.
And it is everybody. I read an article about a lady her PhD was in gender studies. She's one of those women who does the studies on, like, if you get resumes with a male name on it versus resumes with a female name on it, it can be the same resume, but you weight the guy who's someone more reliable or more friendlier or more whatever. And she took her own test one time thinking, this is my test. I designed it. This is what my PhD is in. And when she crunched the numbers, she had rated the resumes with male names on them higher than the resumes with the female names on them. And it's intrinsic into our society. We can be aware of it as we want, and we'll still fall into those traps. So I don't know what our point is on this. We kind of got off on gender, but it's very interesting. I love listening to what these guys have to say.
Honestly, if we're talking about contemporary queer theory, this is where it's at, right? I mean, it's post-colonial, decolonial, decontextualizing. I mean, deconstructing. I mean, this is where we have to go. So I really think it's still relevant to a conversation of how we are coming to understand homosexuality, because we can't liberate that without dismantling the whole imperial hegemony, that we come from, whiteness, masculinity.
All right.
Go
ahead.
I was going to say, to your story, there was a test online 10, 15 years ago. I'm trying to remember what office I was sitting in when I did it, but I can't now, where they would flash up pictures, and it was designed to measure your comfort with straight or gay relationships, and they would flash up pictures, and you would have to click, and they measured your response time as far as did you automatically approve of that, or did you have to consciously think and with the button. And when they gave me my results, they said you are slightly unconsciously biased against gay relationships, and this was, I'd been out for a while, and I was like, dang, it's still in there. It's still, even though you try to get rid of it, but the way to do it is by doing the work, is by catching yourself, and eventually it does become a habit. It does become ingrained. You become more comfortable, and then, you never stop, but
work's never finished. Yeah, I try to tell my students, it's kind of like with fish or swimming in the water, right? And you could ask the fish, what's the water like? And they're like, what do you mean, what's the water like? Because
what's water?
Right. So you've been surrounded by it. It's been in the commercials. It's been in the TV shows. It's been in your family. It's, you know, your friends or whatever. And you just have to learn to be able to step back and recognize those kind of things. And I think, you know, fortunately, we're moving forward a little bit. So we do see, as Brian and I had mentioned in our Infernal Intercourse episodes, that there are TV shows like Lucifer where no one seems to care one way or the other. The characters are gay or they're straight or trans characters in an episode, or in one case, you know, some furry characters, and none of the other characters remark as if it's remotely unusual. So sometimes we're seeing some way idealized versions of our society on TV, but then, you know, hopefully by seeing that, people kind of start to subconsciously adopt this kind of attitude, say, yeah, you know what, it's fine, it's ordinary, okay. And the next time you have maybe a trans coworker or whatever, it's like, yeah, nice to meet you, you know. So, final thoughts?
I think I'll tagline on what you just said. I just saw on Facebook, and you know, we've known this for a while, but someone saying, you know, you don't have to say prefers to identify as, right? And you don't even have to say he's a trans man. He's a man, right? It is true that, like we've talked in here about naming yourself as power, or whatever, but folks can name themselves. Folks can introduce themselves that way. I don't have to describe them, limit them, label them that way, right? And so I think that goes along with what you're saying. Like, how do we respond to this is just, you know, to allow people their agency. Call me what I ask you to call me. treat me how I ask you to treat me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kyle?
I think just to, you know, hit the point again about that Brian and I and you have all said about doing the work and continuing to do the work. There's, especially speaking as a white male who's grown up, there's a tendency that I fell into a couple times where I thought, oh, my eyes have been opened to this problem and now I understand it and now I'll be better about it. But you won't always be better. You'll slip up and you don't know all the problems. There's still more problems out there that other people are facing that you haven't heard about. And the trends right now are moving towards acceptance and tolerance. And I like that, but I've also read enough history to know that things can go backwards. And I think just keep doing the work is what I would leave everyone with. It's worth it.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me, Brian and Kyle. Remember, if you like this video, hit like and subscribe. If you dislike this video, you can hit the little thumbs down too. YouTube doesn't care, and we'd
love to hear that comment if you thumbs down it. We'd love to know why.
Yeah, let us know. Put something in the comments. So we appreciate you viewing this video, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.